Question number 2, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my questions to the Minister of Health. What recent reports has he received, if any, on the failures of the health system?
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I've received a range of reports, mostly positive, and while there's always more to do, in general health services have improved across the board.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Will he front up to public meetings to be held in Havelock North next week, when people are to discuss the failure of their drinking water, which puts their health at risk? Or does he stand by his statement that, quote, we don't have these terrible waterborne epidemics in New Zealand, end quote, made when he opposed legislation to improve drinking water standards?
Yeah.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Usual, Mrs King doesn't give the full context to that quote. It was made back in 2008, a long time ago, and actually, at the time, those comments were absolutely correct. So you should stop misleading people about what I've said.
Order.
Well, she is.
Well, just the last part won't help the order of the House. The question's been answered.
Order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Not referring to the last comments which you said weren't appropriate, but I would seek leave to table the Minister's Hansard so he can actually see what he said.
No, order. Now, the member's now trifling with me. Hansards are easily available to all members if they thought it valuable to go back and do such research. Order. I have a point for...
I'd like to finish answering the question.
I'll allow the Minister to ask...
Look, in terms of what's happened in Havelock North, obviously the government has announced the terms of reference for an inquiry, and we're in the throes of putting that together, as was announced at the Prime Minister's press conference on Monday.
Question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Will he now admit yet another failure in health because some DHBs are refusing to sign his ill-conceived Compass Hospital food deal, which means, according to the contract, DHBs like Southern are now going to have to pay more for their food than currently?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
That's not correct. The DHBs are taking a whole-of-system approach, and in the end we've got to look at what is best for the health system across the board. So I haven't had any reports of people refusing to sign those contracts. So, I'm sorry, I'll wait to be enlightened.
Answer the written questions.
Order.
Supplementary question,
Just
Mr
stand
Speaker.
and ask for a supplementary question. We'll move on. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Why, after years of National denying an obesity crisis in New Zealand, calling measures to address it nanny state, has he put in place a childhood obesity plan the Medical Journal of New Zealand labels as, quote, unlikely to solve the obesity crisis, based on outdated paradigm, and shows the government values corporate profit over public good?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
Well,
Coleman.
don't forget Labor's answer to that was to ban all meals with sugar in them. And the reason we've put the plan in place is because it's the right thing to do. And I just remind the member, we are one of the very few countries which has an obesity target as one of its headline health targets. We've got an evidence-based 22-point plan to address the issue. And I think Mrs King would be better actually being constructive, because if she's got any sensible ideas rather than just making rubbish up, she should put them on the table.
Yes, it was an order. Yes.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the downgrade of training accreditation at Dunedin Hospital and out-of-date facilities, on what date does he expect the physical rebuild of the hospital to begin?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
So I
Coleman.
reckon the member should be constructive rather than talking down his local hospital. There's a very well-defined Treasury and Ministry of Health process to take those papers through Cabinet. We've got to make sure actually that we get the hospital properly developed. We've got to make sure that we've got the services in there that are needed, rather than just, as Mr Clark wants to do, fire from the hip and just announce a date. Because actually it's complex problems in Dunedin. We're making good progress.
Question number 3.